Today is June 17th, 2022. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. And along with me is Ben Pollard, a retiree of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. We're in Oklahoma City to speak with Trey Lam, current Executive Director of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, and has been in that position since November of 2014.
Correct.
Does that sound right?
Yeah.
And a lifelong conservationist.
True.
Today's interview will be part of our Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. So thank you for letting me come today.
Well, thanks for interviewing me and including me in this project. It's really exciting.
Well, before we get into all of your conservation work, let's learn a little bit about you. Start wherever you like.
Sure. Okay. Well, I was born in 1960 in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. And so really, I was thinking about this. Conservation really is on both sides of my family. My mother was born in 1925 in Beckham County in western Oklahoma in a community called Delhi outside of Sayre. And so she actually has memories of the Dust Bowl. So she remembers Black Sunday, coming back from church, having to stop along the way, and we're actually standing up in the back of the car or the truck and seeing the dust and having to stop and go into a neighbor's root cellar too. So that's kind of where it all began, kind of on that side of the family. My father then was raised in the Ouachita River bottom, which is, we'll probably talk about our small watershed program. So significant flooding every year, and was really along that Ouachita River from by Lake Texoma all the way up to western Oklahoma out by Clinton. Those people got together and actually started that program because they would have what they call major flooding twice a year sometimes, and that's where over 50% of the floodplain is underwater. So my family farmed, my grandfather and my father, and then myself and my uncle as well, in that whole bottom there, right along the Ouachita River around Pauls Valley. And so that would be underwater with flood damage and debris from the Ouachita River twice a year when my grandfather and father farmed. And so then that was one of the reasons also the city of Pauls Valley would be flooded a couple of times a year. So that started the watershed program. So then for myself, I only saw flooding in 1986. The last flood was in 56. So rather than twice a year, there would be a flood about every 30 years. And actually there hasn't been one now since 1986 that has affected the town. So that's a personal, and I can tell you from my experience in 86 cleaning up the debris, logs and trash and sand piles that washed out across the land, I can only imagine doing that in the 20s and 30s with horses and all pitchforks and all that by hand, because it's a major undertaking. So so from a genetic or environmental, conservation impacts on families has been a big part of my life. So was born, my dad was a sharecropper. We weren't landowners. He tells the story of my grandfather. He came to Oklahoma and began sharecropping, and they would sharecrop in from World War II on, but when World War I on, as soon as he was a good farmer, he would clean up a farm, 40 to 80 acres, and then the landowner would take that farm away from him and either farm it himself or give it to one of his neighbors, and they would move on to the next farm. So it's been a long time doing that. And then in the mid 40s, when my dad was 12 years old, they moved on to a farm, the Thompson farm, that was actually owned by the family of a former congressman, and they began farming that. And they started with a portion of that family's farm. They had several farmers because there was only so much each farmer could farm, and then they moved on and took over more and more of that farm. And that's where then I was born, living in that same house that my dad was raised in. And we didn't actually own that house. I have a picture here on the wall of it when my dad lived there, and even before, when it was originally built. People assumed we owned the farm because my grandfather and my father's rule and early on it hurt them, but in the end it really helped us, was whether the land was rented or you owned it, you treated it like your own. And you always wanted to make that better and improve it. And so from 1942 until I took this job, we farmed that continuously, that entire farm. And most of the people in town thought we owned it because we always lived there. We all grew up there. We made improvements on it. So that's sort of the background there. Although one experience of growing up on a farm is that you spend a lot of time working on the farm. And so all I wanted to do was get away from the farm. So I went about as far away as I could. My mother helped me apply and was accepted to Yale University in Connecticut. So spent 4 years there, and then went to work for Cargill, the grain company, as a commodities trader in Memphis, Tennessee. But that was an awakening for me because I'd always never wanted to be in agriculture. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was a toll and a task. But when I was in Memphis and working for Cargill, they hired a lot of people from the Midwest and a lot of engineers and college graduates, all of them. But they all wanted to go back. They all wanted to return to their roots, to be on that farm, but they didn't have that opportunity because they either had a brother or their parents weren't farming anymore or the economy wouldn't let them. So their dream, and so to listen to those other people talk about it sparked something in me to think about. I could work for this company or go to law school. I could do anything and work for a career for someone else, and then wind up with always what I said was a nice house and a family and a good life. Or I could go back to Oklahoma, where I was raised around my family and friends, and work for myself in my family and have an opportunity. So that really made me start to think about it. So after a while, I decided to approach my father and ask him what he thought about me coming back. So made that decision in 1985 and returned and became a full-time farmer for 30 years. It was kind of interesting, though, because my dad was he was a sharecropper. We cropped on, he kept 2/3 of the crop and gave 1/3 to the landowners. He made a good living at it and had enough land for a family to raise 3 kids and send them to college and live a nice life. But when I came back, it wasn't 2 families. It wasn't it wasn't a moneymaker. So we soon after I got back, I realized we're going to have to double the size of this operation to be able to support 2 families. So we took on more land and rented more land, and then we continued in that partnership. And slowly, then he took less of a role, and I took more, and so eventually took over the farm. Got married and had 2 children. They both attended Stanford University. I have one who has a software project manager in Seattle now, and he actually got a master's in Earth Systems, which is Earth Science. So I always say, great job in this time of climate and climate change. Every company or organization has a green division. He got the entrepreneurial bug, so he wants to be in software now. So took him in a different direction, but he still keeps an interest in the farm and what we're doing. And then my daughter went off and was in DC for a while, came back, and now she's actually about to get married to a farmer in southwestern Oklahoma. Once my mother told me about her mother, and her mother came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon, and they settled in a dugout in western Oklahoma, and that's where mother was born. But one piece of advice about marriage my mother had was don't marry a farmer. So then, of course, my uncle's advice to my mother was, you should marry him, it might be your last chance. So, but anyway, so then my daughter is marrying a farmer in southwestern Oklahoma. But she's also involved in conservation. She works for the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts as a grant coordinator for them. And has been a part of the Leopold Award. They have a mentorship program. She's Choctaw Native American. So for what they consider underserved minorities in conservation and agriculture. So she's been through that and has been involved in conservation environmental issues. So it's really a kind of a generational thing. So sort of what brought me to conservation was my father was on the local conservation district board before myself. And then when he decided to retire off the board, I wasn't on my local board because he was. I was always well aware of everything that was going on and the programs and the activities. And he served at the state level on the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts, OECD, on their board for his area. So when he decided to step off, then I stepped in and took his role. So that's kind of what brought me to here. I was 55 years old when I had the opportunity. We were actually looking for someone. The Conservation Commission, Ben Pollard, who's here with us today, had retired, and Mike Thralls, who was the executive director at the time due to health issues, he finally had decided that he needed to retire. And so the search was on for a new executive director. And although I wasn't formally involved, I had been a officer in the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts, had a real interest in how that position was filled, because we can talk also about the partnership between the local conservation district and all the 84 conservation districts in Oklahoma and the Conservation Commission, how they work hand in hand. So the state agency is integral for the districts to be able to do their jobs, just as the districts are integral for the commission to be able to fulfill its statutory function. And the people that applied, from what we understood, looking in, weren't exactly who might be the appropriate person to run the agency, had experience but not necessarily in conservation or in agriculture, didn't know the history and didn't really have that stewardship ethic that we wanted. We actually went out and asked a few people to apply, and they weren't interested at the time. So finally someone came to me and said, well, why don't you do it? So I always say that I'm the only person that would take the job. So, but no. But so to made a big career change at 55, shifted from being my own boss. We farmed about 2,300 acres of corn and soybeans, alfalfa, wheat, and cattle over probably a 20-mile span there in Garvin County in southern Oklahoma, to being the head of a state agency, which has a completely different set of challenges, completely different set of stress, but was a welcome change. And now after nearly 8 years, I still love it, and it's really still a joy to come to work. So we ramped down our operation in Oklahoma. We kept some rented land for a couple of years, and then we've turned back a lot of that. And so now we have our cattle and my mother's home farm, where she still lives at almost 97 now by herself. So we raise some hay and grazing for our cattle, have about 100 Angus and Angus cross cows there. So still involved in agriculture, but this week actually was spent planting my cover crop. So that's part of our soil health program for the summer, for grazing and for improving the health of the soil. So it's kind of what brought me here today.
So your mother's 97. Is it a centennial farm? Is her farm a centennial farm?
No, my grandfather didn't actually, and that's the farm we're on now. So he didn't actually buy that until about 1950. So that was the first piece of farmland that our family actually ever owned. So haven't been in the land ownership. And my dad, then, that was the only piece my grandfather ever owned. My dad, he and his brother and sister inherited that, and he eventually bought them out. He bought 3 acres that adjoined that to square it up with the highway, and other than buying his brother and sister out, that's the only piece of land that my father ever bought. Wow. And farmed his whole life. And so I actually have a small ranch within about a half mile there that we bought and built a home on. So I bought a little more than them, but we're just not landowners. We're traditional, old school sharecroppers, which is an interesting life, but it also gave us a different perspective, I think.
Still good stewards of the land.
And that was critical, and that was really critical to survive. It was, like I said, it challenged in that they moved us off the land. I remember my grandfather, but then it allowed him, from that point on, once he developed that relationship, every farm we took on was based on the reputation that we'd created as being good stewards of the land. So the landowners knew that their investment would be worth more, be more productive, be more valuable the longer that we farmed it. So once we got that farm, we eventually had 10 landlords scattered out, all kinds of different relationships. We had people in New York and Maryland and families that had moved off, some local people that were our partners in certain cases. So it was a different management operation by the time it got to its largest, but it was successful based on just a proven track record. And that's very similar to conservation and the way that local conservation districts and the Conservation Commission deliver their programs is based on trust and respect and knowing that anything we bring to landowners is going to be voluntary, it's going to benefit them, and it's not going to come with strings that's going to be harmful for them. And you can say those things when you go into a business relationship, but if you don't have a proven track record, they can seem like empty words. And so that was the same philosophy in our farming. That's the same philosophy in the way we took care of our land, but it's also the same thing that conservation ethic that really has made our program so successful.
Did your father do most of his business then with a handshake?
Yes, yeah. It was almost, we had one, maybe when I started, we had one landlord in New York that needed a contract, but really contracts in our business were brought on by USDA, because in order to enter government programs, whether they're the Farm Service Agency commodity-based programs or NRCS, their conservation programs, you need proof that you actually have control of the land as a renter. So you had to have a formal contract. So we would write up formal contracts, get a kind of a standardized document and take those in to show. And the landlord would go, because you've been doing something for 50 years, why do suddenly I need a contract? What's going on here? We bring the legal side of it in. But I think everyone understood, because the landowners also receive their part of the benefits from it. If you're in a crop share, if you have a government program, they get a percentage of those government benefits as well. So, everything was operated just on a handshake. And that was part of the trust too, because you can imagine if you go out and you raise a crop or hay, you're going to harvest that and sell it. Well, the only way that landlord knows that they're actually receiving the income is that you correctly accounted for the bushels. You sold those bushels and you're in their name, or the hay and you're in their name, and brought them all of the money. So one of my landlords always said that about my dad and then myself was that he would trust us with his checkbook, because we could have you can always take part of that and sell it under your own name or someone else's name, or take cash for it or something like that. So it's always, and in any business, there are always people that want to take advantage of other people. So trust was a big part of what we did.
Can we back up a little bit?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Where did they come from when you said they came to Oklahoma? Where did they come from?
Both of them actually were in Texas, was the last stop.
Okay.
So my mother's family came through kind of the Virginia, Baltimore area. Actually, Peter Stevens, who was one of her ancestors who came over, had a ferry near Harper's Ferry, and because I think it was I don't know whoever, there was a big John Brown or whoever had the ferry there, actually had the contract, so put him out of business because he didn't have the government contract to operate the ferry. So they came west and eventually wound up in Arkansas, Evening Shade, Arkansas. Then a group of brothers and family came out to western Oklahoma to farm out there. And then on my mother's mother, they came from Pilot Point, Texas in a covered wagon. They had some family near Port, Oklahoma, near Elk City, and that's where they came and settled. And my father's family came from Kentucky and Missouri into the Waco area, west of Waco, and farmed in that area, and then made several trips back and forth in the late 1800s and early 1900s to Oklahoma. And a lot of that had to do with being sharecroppers. They would put a crop in, and if they kept the land, they might stay a year or two, but if they lost the land, they might move on if there was a farm there, or they might go back to Texas and farm down there for a while.
And then they settled in Garvin County.
Yep, settled in Garvin County.
And the conservation district was Garvin County.
Garvin Conservation District. I'm not sure, back in the day when they formed those conservation districts through an election, they wanted the name of theirs rather. They were originally Garvin and Murray County. There were two, and they separated into Garvin, and they took the county off of it, so they became the Garvin. Yeah. And originally those two houses, kind of a historical thing, where we lived and grew up, that two-story house, the son of Sam Garvin, who the county's named after, built that house, one for himself and one for his mother, and they're exact identical homes. They're two-story brick homes, and they're sitting on these farms that are owned by two families now. One faced east and one faced south, about a quarter of a mile apart down a gravel road. And over the years, from 1907, when the homes were built, the individual families made slight alterations in them, but when you looked at them, you could still see that they were the same home. Yeah.
And so where did you go to high school?
There in Pauls Valley.
Pauls Valley.
Yep, grew up and went, there was a grade school on the east side of Pauls Valley, which was Jefferson School. Same grade school my dad went to was within, half a mile or a mile walking distance of our home. So that's where he went, so that's where we went. So a lot of family history around Pauls Valley and Garvin County.
And did you have siblings?
Yes, I had two older sisters. My oldest sister went to Oklahoma State and got a degree in journalism and moved around to small newspapers in Arkansas and West Texas, Louisiana. And she and her husband wound up in Louisville, Kentucky. She still lives there. She's retired now. And then my other sister started at OSU, finally graduated from OU and got a master's there and went on to get her PhD in sociology. And she passed away in her early 40s, but she still has family, one son here in Oklahoma and a daughter that's in North Carolina now.
Did they help on the farm as much as you?
Well, not early, but they both did later. Growing up from junior high on, I worked on the farm. My sisters during junior high and high school did not. But then my oldest sister came back and ran a combine for my dad a couple of summers. And the old crusty old farmers that part of their operation was they did custom harvesting in our local area. We never went outside the county, but the old farmers would say my sister was the best combine operator, and they would always jab me with that. And then when my other sister went to OSU, she came back in the summers and moved home once, and so she went to work on the farm. So for a couple of summers there, they farmed also, mostly while I was in high school.
Well, do you remember your first time driving a tractor?
I remember the first summer because one of the things we had a lot of alfalfa, and so it was baled with little balers. So your first job on our farm was raking hay, and so would always take two tractors, and they would cut the hay, and then we would come back and turn it over to let it dry out. So I started that summer. My older cousin, he was about 5 years older than myself, would do that. And it was kind of in a time, of course, there were no cell phones or communication, so my uncle kind of ran the hay and harvesting business, so he was on that side, and my dad was doing some other farming. And you had to rake the windrows into pairs, that we called them, and then the little balers could come back and bale them. And so I remember you had to turn onto a certain windrow. I don't know how old I was at the time, but I was watching this rabbit run off, and I turned on the wrong windrow. And so I decided to back up. Well, it was a pull-type rake with just a triangle, so it had a single wheel on it. So when I backed up, it turned sideways, and I backed up over the rake. And so, yeah, that was a long ride from that field to where my dad was for my uncle to tell him. So I think that summer I might have retired for about a year of maturity to the next summer. But then I can remember all through junior high, you have, first day of school was always a big day. You got new clothes and, you went and saw your friends. But it seemed like it was always a dry time of year, so we were always baling hay. We would start when we normally do it at night, but during the late summer, early fall, it was so dry you had to do it way up in the night. So we'd start baling about 5 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. So we would always be baling hay the first day of school. So you'd bale hay until time to go to school, and then you go to school. So I can always remember that, thinking, boy, I would come to school like that when the other kids would be there in their new clothes and things. So, yeah. Wow. So we started on open top tractors. Now my dad farmed when he was young with horses, but we didn't have a cab tractor, gosh, I guess until I was probably in high school, and still farmed mostly without cabs until after I graduated from high school. Wow. So.
And when you graduated from high school, what year would that have been?
1978.
78. And your plans besides getting away from Oklahoma?
Was to get an undergraduate degree and then go to law school. And so I actually applied to law school after I graduated and got into a few, but I thought, well, I want to take a break for a few years from going to school and work. And so that's when I applied for some jobs and got the job working for Cargill. Okay. And so that kind of led me down this path. But yeah.
Well, back on the farm, were they doing conservation? Was your father doing conservation type things for the land he was?
Yes.
Working on?
We actually found when they cleaned the files out there in Pauls Valley in Garvin Conservation District, they found some press clippings from back in the late 40s or early 50s. And back in those days, they would have a large conservation banquet every year, and there might be 300 people at the fairgrounds, and they were all there in their suits and ties. And then they had some conservation farmers that they honored, and there was a large group. And on the back row in the upper corner was my grandfather, who actually won an award for something he'd done in conservation, probably some terracing and things like that. But they did terracing, and then my dad was always interested in kind of what was the latest thing in conservation, or in any type of farming, whether it was equipment or seed or fertility practices, that kind of thing, entomology. And so we were always looking for different things in conservation, and that's what led him to get on his local conservation district board. Okay. And so that was his interest in those kind of things.
In Garvin County, what were some of the major conservation issues? I know you mentioned the watershed was one of them, but were there others?
Right. I probably the driving force was flooding. And eventually between the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, just within our county, there were 145 flood control dams built. So it's one of the two largest numbers of dams in any county in the state is in Garvin County. And one of the original members of the Conservation District Board there, Dick Longmire, was one of those partners, along with people. There was a man named Humphreys and Nolan Fuquay and others, Lloyd Church, that really got together along the Ouachita River and formed a group of landowners or farmers and ranchers that lobbied to get that pilot project started and get it implemented all along there. So it's always been a big part of everything that Garvin Conservation District goes around the flood control program. But then also that entire part of really all of Oklahoma was farmed. Now if you go around Garvin County, the river bottoms are still in crop production, still the same crops that they've always had. But all of the hillsides in Garvin County that are now in pasture were farmed at one time. So where I live, and then the main pasture that I rent, if you drive across them, they have terraces that are over waist high, and they're in Bermuda grass. And if you look at the topography of the ground, it's not that steep a slope, so there's really not a reason. You might have a small terrace if you had a wash or something, but there's no reason that a pasture should have terraces. But if you talk to the old timers, they farmed it. There were corn and cotton and wheat planted on those, and they plowed that land every year, so it washed away. And so that was a big part of the early conservation, even before the flood control program, would be terracing that land and trying to move some of that that crop production out into cattle and grass production.
I think, isn't there a lake like Longmire Lake?
Right.
It is.
So, and it was one of the later ones actually that was built along Sandy Creek. So the city of Pauls Valley needed a second or new water supply. So they went in and, gosh, I guess it was the late 70s, early 80s, probably mid 80s when they completed it and built Longmire Lake, which is a municipal, it's multi-purpose. Like one of the great things about the watershed program is that they were built primarily originally for flood control, but one of the things that was built into the program was that they could have multiple uses. So it is a city water supply, and it's a recreational, one of the best fishing lakes in Oklahoma, small fishing lakes as well. But it's on the northeast side of Pauls Valley there, a clear creek, one of the few clear ones in Garvin County, but the water's really high quality.
So you drive from there to here every day?
Right. And so people think, oh, that's crazy, an hour commute. But I say, well, if you spent 8 to 12 hours a day on a tractor and bale hay all night, an hour each way doesn't seem very far at all. I mean, that's just the early part of your day. So it really, it doesn't bother me at all. I've never really had a problem with it.
So once you graduated from Yale and decided to come back to Oklahoma and join your father, what were some of the first things you did as far as conservation on the land that you were working with?
Of course, you're just learning at that point. You've operated all the machinery. You know the how, but you don't necessarily know the why. And one of the first things my dad told me was, well, you need to get involved with your conservation district. So, and they came out onto some land that we had, and with our Natural Resource Conservation Service, USDA, district conservationist, and looked at the issues that we had. One was we have a pasture right next to I-35, and back then they used to channelize a lot of these streams. So they took the stream that had naturally meandered through the property, and you could tell that it had flooded and was a floodplain. And they crossed the interstate with it going due east and west, and they went to a point just the other side of the road from our property and turned it south, and then took it straight through one of our farms. Well, we'd always farmed next to that, and it continually built levees up against it because it naturally wanted to work its way back to where it originally had been. And so we kind of battled that on our own and worked with the Soil Conservation Service and Natural Resource Conservation Service to do that. But then, so one of the first things I did on some property that I had was we had a bad wash, and so it was washing out up into the pasture with a large ditch and gully. So we got on the state cost share program because we didn't go into the USDA. It was a smaller project, and we put in a small retention, like a dam or a levee with a pipe through it. Still have that same project there today. But this stream that they channelized during the summer sometimes doesn't even have water in it. It a lot of times has a trickle, but it drains off of a large area around the interstate. And when it becomes a significant rain, it'll be probably 20 feet deep and rushing. And so anywhere it can find a low spot in a bank or something, it's going to come out and on you. So, and you can, part of my property is on the other side of the creek. We tried to maintain a low water crossing there, but finally decided we couldn't. So we have it fenced off, and we actually have another entrance on the other side of the creek. So we go out and around, just not very far to access the other side. But it starts to give you some thought. I've actually looked here at the commission. We have the Office of Geographic Information. One of the things we operate is OK Maps, which is a online open source database, and they've gone in and looked at some of those old historical aerial photos that were taken different years across Oklahoma, and one of those is pre interstate highway, so it's pre mid 1960s, early 70s, And so you can see our property was actually part of some property on the other side of the interstate. The interstate doesn't run true north and south, so it dissected some of that property. But you can see the old channel the way it was before they straightened it. You can see, before there were some of the ponds and other things that were built on that property. So it gives you an idea of what it was looked like and why those things are there. And I think so many times, whether we look at a dam for flood control, or we look at a terrace, or a drainage area, or why we maintain a riparian area along a creek, we don't really understand what those were put there for. But after you've had a major flood, or you go back and you realize, oh, that's why that was done. Or you go back on someone's property and they remove all the trees and mow right down to the edge, and then it floods or runs off, or you have a water quality problem downstream. Well, those things were put in place for a reason. But and now we forget those reasons, or we neglect maintenance of those conservation. And part of what our legacy is to try to maintain some of those things, do new things, but we also need to maintain the things that were done in the past, or we're going to return and repeat the same mistakes that were made in the past.
You're talking farmers into do no-till.
Right. And so that was one of the things that my dad and I started, and it was after we became partners. And I talk about the farming practices that I grew up on. And although we understood what it took to raise a good crop, and we understood conservation, we were in the middle part of the state, so we received 30 to 32 inches. So although we suffered severe droughts, and my dad he was starting a new family and trying to get established in the 1950s, which was really a more severe drought than the 1930s, although it just didn't have the dust because of the conservation practices. But the dry weather and the lack of crop production and the temperature were just the same. And at the same time, Oklahoma's weather, just as it had been in the 30s, and it would return in the 80s, you had drought and flooding both at the same time. So some of the worst flooding was in the 30s, some of the worst flooding was in the 50s. So that drought, the flood that he remembers from the late 50s that then returned in the 80s for me was during a period of drought. So, he had lived through that, but we still farmed full tillage. So board plows, we would plow, then we would disc several times, then we would field cultivate several more times. And we wanted a soil that was more like a sand, not a soft sand, but a very uniform soil that had no structure to it, had no clods. Clods were our enemy, because we wanted to plant a seed in a completely uniform seed bed, kind of like you might do in a laboratory, in what I always call a petri dish, so that your medium was completely controlled. And then we would place the fertilizer. We didn't have precision equipment, but we put, whether dry fertilizer, anhydrous liquid, we would place the fertilizer in a certain place. We would place the seed at a certain depth, and if we had the land completely uniform, if the moisture was there, we could have the moisture at a certain depth, and then we would grow our crop. And then if we had weeds, we wanted to kill anything that was growing out there besides the crop that we wanted. So we would put pesticides, herbicides, and then any insects that came along, we would control those with insecticide. So what we wanted was a completely controlled environment. And in our rainfall area, if we selected the best variety of corn seed, and we got an appropriate amount of rain, and we did the right job planting it at the exact right time in early March, and we would then have to rotary hoe it and cultivate it to keep those weeds and that competition out. We could grow, starting out at 100 bushels, we got up to where we were at nearly 200 bushels in dry land production, which is phenomenal for that. But at the same time, we were depleting our soil. We were creating hard pans. The soil was becoming less and less productive, took more and more fertilizer, more and more inputs, more and more chemicals to try and control those weeds. And we had genetically modified seeds that then we could put Roundup on, and then we had resistant weeds that came into that took other chemicals. So we, in the late 80s and 90s, we tried no-till, and one of our challenges was, and that we still see with farmers in Oklahoma, was on rented ground, that the landlord is interested in income. And so whether it's cash rent or crop share rent, they want the maximum income. Well, no-till is a process, and if you switch to that process, a lot of your savings is in the less number of tillage practices. So you can reduce your yield if you don't have to moldboard plow this 3 times, field cultivate 3 times, rotary hoe to get it up, because you've taken as many up to 10 steps out of the process, and all the fuel and labor and equipment that you can reduce. But that's on the farmer. So the landlord still wants that 200 bushels per acre. So if you have any yield drag at all, even though my profit may be higher doing that, you're continually trying. They want to know, well, why is my yield or my check not quite as big as it was? But on some of the land that we had full control of, and some of my mother's land, we began to do some of that. And we would do it in fits and starts. And that's one of the problems that we had with no-till was we might go into it for 5 years. And Oklahoma's weather is so cyclical that in good years it produced with everything else. But then, making that long-term transition, it was hard for us to stay with it. So we would try it, and then we would stop, and then we would go back, and we knew everything told us, everything we read, all the conservation meetings, it will work. But a lot of people also tell you that they were bankrupt when they started doing that, and they were forced into that. And that's one thing. There's usually a major social change in people's lives, either a major drought or a flood or a economic crisis or a commodity crash, that if we weren't going to do this, we were going to be out of farming. Well, we were never really at that point. We could make money for our landlords and our families. So for us to make the change, it was a little bit different. And so we continued. And finally, on my mother's place, we got an EQIP contract, which is through USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, where they would pay us a little bit each year to do no-till and to commit to it for a 5-year project. So my thought was, let's figure this out on the front end, because we would try no-till, and then what I would say, the no-till evangelist or the experts will come back and say, well, you did this wrong, or you did this wrong, you did this wrong. Well, that doesn't help me. Hindsight didn't help me at all. It just told me what I did wrong. So I thought, let's start from the front end. So we, OSU came down and did grid soil sampling on this farm. So we knew that there was very much a difference from the top end that was sandy, where the water began to run, to the bottom where it drained into that channelized creek. The pH was different, the phosphorus was different, the soil types were different. And then we entered in this EQIP contract that protected us a little bit financially, and then we committed. And then we had folks from whether it's Natural Resource Conservation or OSU that were promoting no-till at the time come down and consult with us as we moved through that. And still, there were challenges involved. One of the big money producers in our area is alfalfa. And so alfalfa is a tiny little seed, like a lettuce seed, that it has to be placed right in the top of the soil. And it's really sensitive to get established. Once it gets established, it's a very hardy plant that has a very long taproot, can withstand drought and other things. But that first few weeks is really critical. And that's why one of the things is that perfect seed bed is what it likes. And it likes just a certain amount of rain. So to do that no-till, that was a challenge for us to try to make that transition. But we did, and so we got that farm, and so it's been in continuous no-till since then. But one of the things that, even as I moved out of farming, was soil health. The soil health movement that was driven by farmers all across the country and the world was to look at it as a systems approach, because our only aspect that we were taking into account was the no-till part of it, that just simply not tilling the soil ought to work. Whether you were going to continue to plant corn for 20 years on it, or beans, or whatever it was you were doing, just the fact that you weren't going to till it anymore, you ought to be able to be successful. But what they've shown is that you're really looking at the biology and the structure of the soil beneath. You need to have all the different, you need to not only not disturb it, but you also need to leave a significant amount of residue on top of that to feed the biology in the soil. So if you take a soybean crop off of it, soybean leaves very little residue, and so you're actually leaving the soil bare, because the organisms in the soil, both earthworms but also fungi and bacteria, will dissolve that what little bit of pods and stem are left from that soybean crop, and you're back to bare earth. So you're back to subjecting it to the weather, whether it's hot or cold. The same compaction and things start to occur because it's bare again. So you need either a rotation that leaves a lot of cover from a grain crop such as wheat or rye or corn in rotation with a soybean crop that then going to come back and put nitrogen back in that soil. So, and if you're only growing wheat, you've got one type of bacteria and fungus that like wheat. So that's the only spectrum of this large spectrum of biology in the soil that survive. But if you have that original crop, you rotate other crops with that, or you can also use cover crops that have a multitude of different species of crops in the summer or the winter in your non-cash crop, then you're feeding that biology. And once that biology gets robust, then there's going to be a healthy soil. You know, it's similar to the biology in a lake, or the biology in a stream, or the biology in your own gut, or in a cow's rumen. You've got to have that proper balance, and if you get that out of balance, then you're going to have illness in the soil. And that's the same thing that happens to you if you take a lot of antibiotics or you take a lot of chemotherapy. Is you kill that biology, and that really makes you weak as a person. And that's why you hear about things like probiotics and things. Well, that's basically the same thing for the soil. And so the benefits of no-till are there, but the real benefits to the soil is in having a lot of cover on the soil all the time, having a living root, feeding that biology and exchanging nutrients from the plant to the fungi and bacteria in the soil, and then exchanging the minerals that they give back to the plant, whether it's nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium, back into those plants, keeping something living there. And then also introducing some large livestock, you know, whether it's anything from sheep, or mostly it's cattle here in Oklahoma. So we graze it, that then puts it back to that natural state when the bison and the large animal roaming herds went across it, and the hoof activity, but also the spreading of those nutrients across that soil. There's a certain amount of biology that's transferred from the animal back into that plant. So you have to manage all those things. And it's not, I mean, there is science, there's an incredible amount of science and all of it, but also I think what we don't always see is there's an art to it too. Because you may start out down a path where I'm going to grow a corn crop this year, so I'm going to do these things to get my corn crop ready. Well, then Mother Nature turns against you and it's dry, so you may need to switch over to a grazing mode, and then you may need to change your path. And that's what I've seen for those that are successful, like Jim Emmons and Scotty Harriman, is they're willing to change and continually make decisions. And it's really hard for a science that's based on repetition, and that's really what the research at our land-grant universities and ARS are all based on. Is we need to replicate. So we need to plant these varieties over and over again in this plot, then we need to take that plot and move it to another geographic location and repeat it again. Whether it's a wheat variety, a fertility test, or a tillage practice, you have to be able to repeat that. So much of what we do in soil health and in this regenerative agriculture movement is evaluating what nature has in front of you, whether it's drought, whether it's pest, whether it's the biology, and then reacting to that or anticipating it and doing something complementary to it. So you may have an aphid out there, but if you go out there and you're scouting and you see that there are predators that are going to eat those aphids, then you may hold off on spraying, or you may hold off on taking that action. So once you get it can get that mind switch over to being a systematic approach, and then it takes all parts of that system, and knowing what you're doing now is affecting what's next or what's going on, then you can really start to change the biology in the soil. And although I say that, I mean, I understand it, I'm implementing it, but I'm not always successful in it. And I think with anything, if you have people that are what I call evangelists in it, who are out there preaching it, but maybe not practicing it, or if you go back and look at what they're doing, they're not talking about their mistakes or their failures, then people, that's what hurts us when we're trying to sell it to our customers, our cooperators, farmers and ranchers, is they go out and try it. They go out and say, oh, okay, if I just can put some seed in the ground and not till it, I'm going to make a lot of money. Well, that's not true. There are a lot of other factors and a lot of other things you need to take into consideration in the whole systems approach. So we're trying to take it as a more studied approach, but also a localized approach that it's all has the same idea, but the same decisions won't necessarily work in every geographic area or in every cropping system. It's specific to that individual. And so whether we're working with mentors, where we have farmers and ranchers who are doing it and are working with people who are trying to get started, or we have our consultants who are our agronomist, pasture type people who are going out and talking conservation and grazing management and crop production and species of plants. We have to meet people where they are and don't give them just a perfect roadmap or a perfect recipe, but allow them to fit it into what they're doing, but also to provide them support. I tell the story with Jimmy Emmons that I was doing some no-till, and it was similar weather to like we have this year, dry weather all spring. You're getting ready to go plant your no-till, and then it starts raining. So I've applied my herbicide as my to get rid of those weeds, so I can plant into it, and then I can't plant. And the weeds all come back. So, I'm to that point. What do? I've got, knee-high weeds and grass, and I've got to plant my soybeans in it. I'm going to get my disc out. I'm going to go plow it and knock it down, and that's all I can do. But having a mentor like Jimmy, who is my mentor, say, no, let's think about this. You can go out there with a different chemical that'll actually just kill that plant, but it's just a contact chemical. And then you can plant right into it. That's a lot of stuff out there. Well, just try it. So when I had a farm and I did that, but I also had another farm that honestly, and I tell him now that I didn't believe him, that I went and I sent somebody and we disc it, plowed it, got it back in shape. And that farm that I planted right into the Johnson grass and the pigweed, it produced 20% more than my other farm, because later on in the summer it got really hot and really dry, and I didn't have enough growth on that clean till plowed ground to let those plants survive. But over here, where I'd preserved my moisture and I had a lot of cover on the ground, even from those weeds that were dead, the plants did better, the soybeans survived longer. And the thing we do is we try to get started early, survive through that hot part of the summer, and then like for a soybean crop or a late summer crop, if you can get that late August or early September rain, then you'll make a crop. But so much of our challenge is getting through this really hot time of the year, either producing our crop before then or after then. And so one of the things is that with soil health is it allows us to kind of make that bridge across that really hot time. Or it allows us an income supply, like in the wheat crop. It may rain a lot in the winter, or it might not rain at all. It may rain a lot in the summer. A lot of times those flip off, depending on weather patterns, and we can't really predict it. So if you've got an income source, like a cover crop you can graze in the summertime, when you normally make your money grazing cattle in the wintertime on your wheat, that gives you another insurance, another backup. It's good for your soil, but it's also good for the farmer. And those are the kind of stories that we have to tell. And really, farmers and ranchers, it's hard to convince them, because it's their income and their livelihood and their tradition and their culture that their parents taught them. And it's hard to break all of those barriers at one time. But if you have people that are true practitioners, whether they're other farmers that are near them or farmers from the different part of the state that can come in and stay with them, and now with electronics that can be available to cell phones, because you can be out there on a tractor and about to make a decision that's the wrong decision, and you can call a mentor or take a picture and send it to them and say, look and see what I've got here. they can come right back at you. And that's really kind of that next step in conservation is we used to have enough conservation people, whether they were district or USDA people, you could call them the day before or that night, and they would be out there, either that or your extension people. But they're stretched so thin now, and their numbers have been reduced, by 2/3 in the state in all these programs, that they're just not available. So so they're going to get our farmers and ranchers are going to get their information online, or they're going to make decisions on their own. And we just need to be able to deliver our services in that same way that they want to receive them, or their only way they're going to receive them now.
Sounds like it helps that you've done a lot of this yourself. Lessons learned.
And I think so.
Transfer.
And the other thing is you can do it by learning it and experiencing it through being a professional. And that's what we have to be able to take our conservation delivery that way, because in the past, all the people that came into conservation in the heyday starting in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s grew up on a farm. Mm-hmm. They were first generation. They'd come off the farm. Some of them became technicians at the conservation district or employees right out of high school. And some of them went to the land-grant universities and got a degree in agriculture or conservation and came back. So they had that firsthand experience. And there were a lot of those people. I don't know, there were probably 800 people working in soil conservation in Oklahoma at one time. And so there were a lot of individuals out there. And they could relate really easily to farmers and ranchers, whether old or young. And it didn't take them long. They could talk the talk and to build that respect. Now we have a lot of people coming out with natural resource degrees from our land-grant universities they're the workforce that's going to go to work for Natural Resource Conservation Service for USDA. And a lot of them have never been on a farm. They're interested in the environment. They're interested in working in food or these careers, but they don't know a soybean from a mung bean from a corn, And so they're pretty timid when they get out there. And their work requirement is that they fill out these contracts and they take these applications and they rank them, and then they deliver this money to these farmers or ranchers, and then they report on that, and then they have a lot more of those applications than they can get done. So there's very little time for them to be in the field building that relationship with those farmers and ranchers. But what we need to have our conservation district directors and the people that are involved take them and mentor them as well, so they'll be the entry-level person, and allow them to maybe ask the dumb questions to us, but also while we've got the old farmer out there, we're with them. And if the new employee asks a dumb question or just an uninformed question or says the wrong term, there's someone there who says, they're with me, it's okay. We're going to educate them and bring them along. And if you're bringing them along, then you defend them and you take care of them, and then eventually they're going to get it. They're smart, very smart people, and they have all of the education and the science background and the biology, everything to deliver the programs, but they just need the ability and to build that respect. And so that's one of our challenges with the current workforce, and there was such a reduction in that workforce for so many years that they actually changed the structure of how they deliver it, and now they're hiring, and they're hiring a lot of new people. So you have that whole generation of people we talked about that came off the farm. They're all retiring. So all of our conservation delivery people are retiring. So instead of a slow transition to these new people, it's just like, oh, we got a whole new generation. So it's a whole new system to do it, and a whole new set of programs and a whole new technology that we're going to deliver it through. And so there's a real chance for you to lose your customer base if you were in the retail business selling widgets or whatever. If you've got all the people that were the salesmen out there doing it, and now you're going to take these customer base and say, okay, just order it online from our people over here. That may work, and in some it's been great, but in other businesses fail. There's all kinds of retail businesses that are failing now, and retail conservation can fail too if we can't make some type of transition, whether it's on a personal basis or electronically. We can't go 100% electronic. We can't compete with YouTube and all those things. We can provide all of our programs that way and our information that way, but we still have to be on the ground, on specific farms, on those landowners, looking at their specific problems. And so we can't just rely on the federal government to provide that. We can't rely on the state government, our conservation district directors, and people that aren't conservation, the people that are just practicing these things have to be willing to go and teach other people how to do it. And our role is to bring all that together and deliver it.
Takes a village. Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about your experience with the Garvin Conservation District. Forget the county. Yes.
Sure. Like I said, my dad was on the district board, and so was very familiar with conservation and the role of the conservation district. And Dad was active at the state level, but he and my mother were also was involved in a lot of the programs. They traveled to like the 4 state regional meetings and the national meetings, and so kept up with conservation issues, on the national basis. And so I always, kept up on it, but was never on the board myself. And we talked about it a lot and all the different issues that he faced being a district director. And of course, in Garvin County, we do have over 140 flood control dams. So then when he decided to retire off the board, they asked me to come on and kind of take his place. And so that was very interesting, because a flood control structure is, in most cases, is a dam. It can be a channel or other, but it holds back water. But all of these are located on private property, and so you have an easement to go in and build this. And landowners, back in the days when there was flooding and you couldn't get to town on a regular basis, or your crops were washed away, your land was washed away, or your home, they were very willing to, in most cases, give away these easements. And they still had the use of the land. They still had a water supply there. They could water their cattle out of it, and it made their property, actually improved most of it. So, but then, land changed hands, and people from other states and cities bought the land and didn't understand how they worked. And then you had the energy industry drilling oil wells and pipelines and wind energy coming in, and roads and homes and things like that. So imagine having 145 restricted properties across an entire county managed by a group of elected and appointed officials who might have, if they're lucky, as we did in Garvin Conservation District, 1 full-time employee to inspect and maintain and operate all of those dams. So it was an interesting time being on the board. It took, I think, and one of the things that I would like to do is make it faster. It takes about 3 years to really, I think, understand what a conservation district board is there for. And some people, I think, are on a conservation district board for 30 years and still don't understand what the purpose is, and the purpose can be whatever you want it to be, as long as it's involved in natural resource conservation, renewable natural resources. You can focus a conservation district. You can have one in New York or Montana or Florida, and have a completely different focus, because your concerns there are based on what the local landowners and managers see as the natural resource concerns. And so for us, it was originally flooding. Now we worked over into other areas, whether it was conservation education or water quality, and different things like that, and putting together the state cost share program, where we looked at applications from farmers, and if they had a problem that they needed a conservation practice, we had money available from the state through a small percentage of the gross production tax, and we then allocated that to our farmers and ranchers, and they matched it with their own money and implemented those practices, and that we would pay in that cost share. And a lot of that was really an incentive. They learned what conservation was about, and many of them would go on then to put in more of those same practices, whether it's removing invasive species or that kind of thing. And so I became very interested in that. I'd been involved in other farming organizations, had been involved in the Oklahoma Soybean Association, Oklahoma Crop Improvement, Raising Foundation, Registered Seed, and on my local Farm Bureau board, and involved with OSU on some of their advisory councils and things. But I found, if you're a young farmer and rancher, you can be on every board you want to be on. At first I thought, boy, it's a real honor. People want me to do these things. But really I realized it's hard to get people to do those things. And a lot of people just hold them as ceremonial positions. But I finally found my place on a conservation because it's something I cared about. And a lot of that was what was taught to me by my father and my family. But also it was kind of a culture of our community. One of the older conservation district directors who was very active on the state level is Jack Grimmett. And Jack, he was a crusty, gruff guy. He was my little league football coach. And I was terrible. All the little boys were terribly afraid of Jack. But Jack had a gigantic heart and gave to he was a local banker. Had a small farm that he and his brother owned, but he was concerned about community, about whether he was in the Kiwanis Club or the Conservation District Board, about doing things that helped the community of Pauls Valley and of Garvin. And so I think it was that ethic, the community ethic, that translated to whatever organization you were involved in. You can pick a lot of good organizations, and the one that he concentrated on and that my dad was involved in, I concentrated on, was conservation, because I felt like that's where I could do the most good. And really it's because the idea that these people that are on the Conservation District Board reach out to their neighbors and say, what are the problems that face our local community in natural resources? It could be erosion, it could be flooding, it could be cedar trees, it could be feral hogs, all kinds of, or it could even be a shortage of food, being a food desert. But we want to work on these things that will help our community, and we can access these state programs through the Conservation Commission. We can direct our conservation funds that way. We also can work with our federal partners. They have their working groups, and the Conservation District Board was critical in helping shape what their focus was for the EQIP program or other programs. And so you could have a direct impact. If you wanted to raise your voice and push that, then you could. And from that, I got involved with the state level. And one of my mentors, Scotty Harriman, was president of the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts. And my dad had introduced me to Scotty through our soybean work, and had always thought a lot of Scotty. My dad thought a lot of him, and he had led that organization and brought me along. And then a lot of these are personal relationships, and that's what I say about conservation, whether it's conservation or the church or your community. It's not just a business contract of what do I get when I go to the meeting? What do I get out of it? You don't go to church just to say, what am I going to extract from that? You have to give back, and you have to have those social bonds with the other people that go there. Otherwise, especially in today's society with electronic and media, we can sit at home and get all this information, but we're completely isolated. And a lot we learned through COVID and through a lot of these virtual meetings is we need that social bond. And my dad went to a lot of conservation meetings and a lot of church events and board meetings and things because other people expected him to be there. That there was a common goal and a common good of restoring these natural resources, and you had made the commitment to go and be a part of that and make those decisions and lead. And so you couldn't just neglect that. You couldn't just show up. You had to actually be involved. So I went on to be president of the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts, and through that was actually able to be an alternate on the national board. So I actually got to go and sit in on some of those meetings. And again, then learned Oklahoma's history involved at the national level. Billy Wilson was just the past president of the National Association of Conservation Districts, and there had been a long history of Oklahomans involved in that national organization and been national leaders. And so it wasn't just doing the right thing in my local community or in the state, but there were greater roles that people if you took responsibility, you needed to take in order to make things happen. And Billy is a slow-speaking country boy from southeastern Oklahoma, who a lot of people took for granted, I think. But he showed me that being from that background, you can have an incredible impact. Because we were at a national meeting in New Orleans, and I happened to be there, and it was one of my first, and he said, I just think that this national organization has taken a wrong turn in leadership. I said, okay, Billy, we were sitting around drinking coffee, I thought, that's great that we all think that. It's kind of like complaining about Congress or the president. He said, well, I think, I'm going to do something about it. I said, okay, Billy, sure, great. And he said, and he went and he talked to the other leaders in this national organization. There were 500 delegates or people there, but he talked to the people that needed done. And when the big board meeting came out and the slate of officers came out, the leadership of that organization changed, and the direction of it changed. That affected it for until today, and it was a positive change. And that would not have happened if Billy hadn't taken it upon himself. And so, in a lot of ways, being involved in those state and national organizations opened my eyes that, yes, it's important for that grassroots, but it also is important for other leaders to take it beyond that and be willing to put themselves out there and take on that role. So that led me to my role in the state association that then eventually led me into this role here at the commission.
What was some of the main issues going on as president of OACD? Do you recall anything in particular?
Yeah, I think that the organization at the same time was they wanted to move beyond being just a social organization. They wanted to have an impact. Originally, those founders, the people that started in the 40s and 50s, they were dynamic people that were known statewide, not only in conservation, but in whatever industry they were in, and they were movers and shakers. And then we kind of went through a lull period of there where the people were good, and we all still went to the meetings and everything, but the organization was just loosely kind of like we used to say, it was run out of a shoebox. There was a volunteer in charge of the finances. There were some projects that everybody worked on, but we still had the same due structures that we had 50 years before. We still had the same programs that we were involved in. And so there were some people that wanted to, so we went through a strategic planning process that we had to then go and sell a new strategic plan, a new vision to our membership. So I was one of the people that had to help do that, And so anytime you get change in an organization, that's hard. And then part of that was we need to be on stronger financial footing. You can't limp along as an amateur social club and expect to make change and have impacts. And so there had to be a change in the due structure. So then following up on that, we had to go back the next year and say, okay, part of this strategic plan that you were all on is we're going to change the due structure, and some of it's going to cost more money. Because and so we did that. So I think that was a part of it. And then as I was on that board, we had management, but we were ready to change and move on. So we had to make a change in the administrative side of our organization, and had a really good group of people on the board, and they decided to make that change. So I guess the biggest part of it was change, that the organization, that there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with that organization, but it was ready to evolve and move on. And with any organization, you can, your first thing is to not lose, not step back. And so, but this organization at that time was ready, and so we took some steps, and it wasn't based on my leadership necessarily at all, because I wasn't, when I made a lot of those changes, I was kind of like the past person that had been president a few years before, but I was still very much involved. And so they were very, a strong group, and they were ready to move on, and that's what propelled me into this job, to be that next strong partner for them here.
Were you a commissioner before you were the executive director?
No, I didn't. Some of my friends and people that I knew were commissioners at different times, but had to come up and actually interview with those guys, so that was kind of different.
We'll talk about that experience, yes.
Well, they had been through and taken applications, and taken a fair number of applications, and then they were going to do the interviews. And so I think for them, their biggest concern was that I had no experience running an organization like this, had no experience in state government, I didn't come out of the private industry where I was managing a company or even a nonprofit organization. And also that I was, they all farmed and ranched, most of them did. And so they knew what was behind them at home. A lot of them had several thousand acres of farm, cattle, equipment, payments, all the things that were involved in that. And for someone to come in and say, oh, well, now I'm going to take on this. Well, this isn't a part-time job. This is a career. Some of them are concerned that I might just turn and walk away after, the first big fight that came up or controversy or conflict. And so I think that was probably their biggest question is, are you committed to this? Is this something you've thought about and that you're ready to make this significant change in your life? And so that was the biggest question and the reassurance. And I think then carrying that on, that, getting the job is one thing, but being able to do the job is another. And so I came in to an organization where many of the employees had been here, 20 years. And so they were very capable professionals who understood their job and had a long tenure with Mike Thralls and with Ben as the partnership leadership of the organization. So it was very stable. And many of them, they might have seen in their early years the change when Mike and Ben took over, but many of them have spent most all of their career and built their leadership roles of divisions under a steady path. So they're always worried about change and which direction it's going to take. So it took me a while to build that level of trust and respect with them, and we never had major conflict, but there's always going to be different ways of doing things and different ways of wanting the organization to move forward. And the other thing was, it was during a time period when the state's economy was on a downturn, when state budgets and revenue were down. And so we consistently took budget cuts over the years. Those first probably 4 years that I was there, 3 budget cuts and then a flat budget. And so those are hard times because you've got to come back to people and say, okay, your program's got to be smaller. It's not just that you can't grow or that you can't, you've got to cut. And so not only are you the new person coming in, then you're wanting to cut what it is they're doing. And not only did we have to do that within our employees and our organization, but we also had to do it at our conservation districts. We at the time had about 120 conservation district employees who are local employees. We provide some funding to the districts, and then they have to hire them, and they're their supervisors and their employees. But we could not provide that amount of funding to all those employees. And that's something that Mike Thralls, who was the executive director before me, and Ben have been telling us for years, was that the amount of money the state's willing to give us and the amount of resources we have were finite at the time, and our costs are continuing to go up. And so we can't continue to operate on that same trajectory. And actually I'd been involved with a working group with the previous leadership as a conservation district director on, how do we do that? And they told us for years, and it wasn't that we didn't see it coming. They saw it coming, we did too. But then reality hit, and it wasn't a slow reality, it was, so cuts had to be made right away. And so that was kind of my first big challenge, was working my way through that. And so we had to go back and tell some conservation districts that when their employee left, they couldn't have a new employee, that they had to share an employee, even though they were a very productive conservation district that were accomplishing their goals. We could not fill that position. They had to use an administrative person or a field person from the other district next door. So we then put together working groups to tackle this issue of district directors and local district employees and our staff and our federal partners on what is this going to look like, what need to be our priorities, and how are we going to do this. So we required each district to have a shared working agreement with the district adjoining. and they had to have projects that they worked on. In some cases, they had to share employees and responsibilities. And then there were districts as we moved along that as their employees retired, and if there were a district that wasn't particularly active, they had to then work and consolidate and be absorbed into another district. And those were, very difficult conversations. Those conversations that had been going on for decades before, but that just weren't. But the financial reality was that we couldn't prop up the system anymore.
Yeah.
And so they crossed that border, and so we had to make some changes, and so those were difficult. And we had conservation districts that in one geographic area there might be 5 district employees. Well, that amount of workload would only really justify 2 to 3 employees. So we had to have those conservation districts share those employees. And it's very much a territorial ownership thing. Is we don't want to share, we don't want to give. But through that, we had a lot of communication with our district boards and built up a lot of, I don't know whether you'd say trust, but respect. They respected. We explained what we were doing. We explained the logic behind what we were doing, and it's something that had to happen. And so, in general, there was acceptance. Whether there were probably continuing some hard feelings and things that they didn't want it to happen that way, but it was things. And it, in some ways, in those darkest times, whether they're weather-wise or economic-wise or social change, positive things can come out of that. And it did allow us to make some changes and change some attitudes that had needed to be changed. And also, I've been a conservation district director. I mean, I had fought for my employees. I had argued with Ben and leadership about funding for my employee and what my employee ought to be able to do, and that my employee should only be working in my district and should be able to do things that I directed him to rather than responsibilities that the state had provided him funding to do. And I fought just as hard on the other side of it. So I knew that when I went in as the head of the organization, that I knew exactly where they were coming from. And that built some understanding there, but at the same time, it didn't make them any less supportive of what they wanted to do any stronger. But it gave me an understanding from where they were coming from.
Would you have those conversations in person or over the phone or all of the,
All of the above. A lot of them were over the phone, but then we had to go and meet individually. We met individually with with all the districts that where we had to make changes, and then there at about the 3rd year of budget cuts, where we were actually talking about combining districts and then turning around and having to combine employees and require employees to move across district lines. We had to bring together several districts in one room. Yeah, we had some there was we went to a district in southeastern Oklahoma that their employees had retired, and they were really small, and they were part of another county with another district, and logic thing was that then to combine on county lines. And so we went down there to tell them that's what was going to happen. And we were in an old office in a tiny little conference room, and we were there were 8 of us around 9 around a table about this size, and the room wasn't big enough for that many people. And yeah, it was tense in that room, and we had some colorful characters. And we had one of the district directors. He was there, and not to say anything, I dress the same way when I'm on the farm, but he had on a pair of overalls with a t-shirt with the sleeves cut out and an old straw hat, and he had a knife about this long. It was a Bowie knife, and he used that as that he made a point with, and so he was making a point on the table with that. And Lisa Knopf Owen, who's assistant director, were down there, and I thought I was going to have to crawl across the table to get out the door before she did as we ran out. But I mean, I think being willing to go and engage people and explain and go over that we're not targeting you, we're not saying that you're doing anything wrong. We're just saying that we can no longer financially support that. And I think if you get it from a personal perspective, you talk about your business, you may I don't know, you may want to raise a certain crop. You may want to raise cotton. Well, if cotton doesn't make any money, or you can't do that, or you may want to run a dairy. There were, hundreds or thousands of dairies across Oklahoma, but the economy wouldn't allow people to do that anymore. So people had to make those changes, and in some ways, we had to play the role of the banker, in that the state's finances just won't support that many organizations with that many people. So we took a real dip, and now things have really gotten better. The state's finances have gotten better, and one thing that we had to do is build relationships, because our funding comes from the legislature. So we had to, do our job in telling the legislature what it was that we were doing and what we had done, and explain to them the value of conservation districts over the last 80 years that have brought us to this point. And then we spent a lot of time at that. Risk and reward is what we talked about. Investment. We weren't able to make a lot of new investments, but to continue to invest in conservation districts because of the benefits they were providing to the state, whether it was in flood protection, water quality, improving the quality of water for the state, or preserving our natural and our soil. Because if Oklahoma's soil continued to deteriorate, then the productivity of the state and that part of the base economy was going to go away. So we had to tell that story, and that's a story that had been told for a long time. But with term limits at the legislature, there used to be kind of people that understood the function and the historical function of these different parts of subunits of government, but there weren't very many people over there that had any history with conservation districts, with the Conservation Commission, with the way things had been. They hadn't experienced the flooding, they hadn't experienced the Dust Bowl. So why do we work on those things? So we had to tell them that this is still something that's important to invest in. And once we had told that story and built those relationships, and a lot of that isn't just me or someone from my staff going over there, it's those local conservation district directors making those calls and saying, inviting those people out, here's this project that we're working on, here's our dam that protects the city or provides the city with this water, here's the stream that provides the water to our lake, and we put conservation along this stream on these private property, on these landowners, that now that water quality is improved enough that we don't have to spend as much money treating that water that the people drink in that town. And when their constituents are telling them those things, then they start to listen. And we told those stories for several years there, when the answer was always no, and the answer was always you get less money. But we survived those periods, and now when they remember those projects that we told them about, the importance of conservation district employees, and they went back and they said, okay, we will fund more funding and resources for district employee salaries. We will go back and we will put money into these dams. A program that we have in the agency here, the Office of Geographic Information, actually began in the 1990s, I guess, here when geographic information, which is mapping, which is the idea that you can take a layer of information and put it in a computer base, and then you can layer those things together, and being able to use those, whether it's for public safety, whether economic development, for natural resources, anything that has a point on a map with any type of information, you can put all that in a database. And our predecessors saw the value of that, and we agreed to host that. But we supported that from funding just on our own, not me, but the agency, from our other programs. And this year, after those decades of doing that and telling that story, there was actually ongoing funding provided for that Office of Geographic Information. So, it's one of those things that if they hadn't had the vision to put it here, if my predecessors hadn't funded it out of just general revenue and other programs, using money from other programs to fund it, it wouldn't have been there when the story became such. Because now we're working with the next generation 911 system, because as whether the public safety of the city's police, the sheriff, the ambulance service, and the fire service all across the state, they overlap. and you can call on your, or get located on your phone, on a cell phone, and they may send an ambulance from an hour away when you're 15 minutes from a different ambulance, just because. So that's kind of the next generation, and that's going to be, a lot of that data and all the training is going to be housed here at the commission. So it's because we had the expertise and the people and the database put together that we're able to engage on that. So,
And that helps when, like, after the tornadoes, the more
Right.
tornadoes, the GIS,
right, to be able to show where all those, the services were located, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Was there a moment during all that time that you thought, oh, why did I do this?
Not, there was all, I guess I never saw it as something that I regretted, and not one point that I read it was, there were a lot of challenges, but I never once thought I shouldn't have made that decision. Because
In your 8 years here, has that been the toughest part, or have there been some other major challenges?
I think, internally, that we, between divisions or between personalities, there was a challenge there where we had to overcome some of those kind of long felt emotions, and I think people have worked through that, and there have been some changes in staffing. Just, for some people have left, others have come in, and so we're at a good place. And I think we've rebuilt some of that previously was here, that people always considered a family. And so I think with any transition in time, sometimes families around each other too much, to where then you have to take a little time and put together a new group. And so certainly we still have a lot of the same people, but we kind of have new relationships. So I think that was a challenge. And then the finances were a real challenge after that. And that took several years to work through. And then, of course, we did go through the COVID, through the pandemic, and that meant a shutdown of our offices. And we had conservation districts that are co-housed with the USDA Service Center in the counties all across the state. Most of them. There are a few that have separate offices, but the vast majority of them share office space. And so they actually, because of the partnership, they value the conservation district, so they provide space within their lease space for the conservation district employee to be there. Now, the conservation district employee works for the conservation district and not for the federal government. So if the federal government closes the doors or reduces access or requires testing or requires vaccinations, then that affects, they don't have the ability to tell the conservation district employee what to do, but it affects the conservation district's employee ability to go to work. And then all of our conservation district board meetings were being held in those buildings. When those buildings closed, the conservation district's directors had to find someplace else to have their public meetings. And these were, public. You had to post the agendas, and they were subject to open meetings laws. And so some of those were held in parking lots and barns, in churches, and in other places. And that was a real challenge. And it also caused a conflict because the rules that applied to the federal government didn't apply to the state and the local government, but they were being affected by them. And so, they would say, well, we're the conservation district. We're not federal employees. We don't have to go by these federal rules. Well, in this building space, you do. And in some cases, the conservation district actually owned the building. They would build the building for the USDA, and then the USDA, they lease all their space. So the USDA doesn't actually own any buildings. Well, in these small towns, rural communities, not everyone wants to build a building for the government to be in. So the conservation district would go out and build the building and then lease it back to the USDA. Well, some places they were not allowed in their own building. Yeah. So even though they owned it, they couldn't go in it. So yeah, and so you've got a lot of independent-minded farmers and ranchers and landowners who were not happy about the rules. And so there was a fair amount of conflict about that, and it strained that partnership between the conservation district and the state agency, and also between the state and the conservation district and their federal partner. And the thing that's made Oklahoma work so well and be so successful and really lead the nation in conservation is the tight partnership that we've had. There has not been the antagonism or jealousy between conservation districts, the state agency at the Conservation Commission, and our federal partner, the USDA. We've worked hand in hand. When you go in a USDA service center, you don't know whether you're talking to a USDA employee, a conservation district employee, or a state employee. And there were no jealousies there. There were, the roles could be, we would help them, they would help us, everyone provided. It worked more like a family there. And this COVID really put a strain on that relationship because everyone had a different set of rules. We had, as the state, we had a set of rules, feds had a set of rules, but the conservation districts were making their own rules. So those conflicted. And there was, the belief in vaccinations, belief in COVID and the pandemic. There were different groups of people that believed different things. And depending on what you believed, it was how you wanted the policy implemented for your organization that you controlled. And so that created conflict and hard feelings. But a lot of those are being overcome. And what we found out was the worst conflict was with people that didn't know each other. So it was easy for the conflict to escalate when there wasn't a personal relationship between the commission and those directors. When a board had changed, but where you had that trust and a strong relationship, or whether it was a federal partner had a strong relationship with the local board, they were able to work through those things. But where the relationship wasn't strong, that's where conflict arose and spilled out into the public and in other arenas. So where we did have a conflict, where the boards were really upset, we eventually, at the tail end of COVID, or at least before the Delta, we had to go back out and meet with those boards again and explain ourselves and where we were coming from as a state and why there were different rules for different people, and that we were going to stand by them until we worked all this through. And so now, as things start to get back to somewhat of a normal, I think we're going to put it behind us. But we've also along with the USDA and the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts have a leadership program which Ben started here a couple of decades ago or more. And some of those people that we had the biggest conflict with during COVID, those conservation district directors who we butted heads with their federal partners, are in that leadership program. And they wouldn't have been in that leadership program if there hadn't been that social upheaval, if we hadn't gone to them and said, worked it through and met with them one-on-one. Now they want to be involved, and they don't want to be involved to tear the organization down or get work through hard feelings in a bad way. They want to be a positive influence now. And so a lot of that conflict is being used for good now.
The education in a different aspect.
Right. Yeah, and I think it does. It gets back, and really the way the delivery system has worked is those relationships. Whether it's a relationship between the board members or between the customers, which are the farmers and ranch landowners, and them, and being able to deliver both state and federal programs through that local conservation district and through that one-on-one relationship, because there's a general distrust for government. It's always been there. It was there in the 30s and the 40s when they began to form conservation districts, because conservation districts had to be voted on. And some voted on them immediately and they passed. Others, half a county would vote for it and half would vote against it. Some didn't come on for decades because there was just a general distrust. But now, because of 80 years of delivering conservation and saying no matter what the funding source is, we're going to bring you something that's going to be voluntary, good for you, that's not going to hurt you, that's not going to restrict your ability to do what you do, but it's going to be a benefit. Now we bring EPA programs to the most conservative farmers and ranchers, and they understand that this is a positive, voluntary EPA program that helps me not only improve my own place, but also improve the water that's next door to me and runs past my place that's used for recreation that my kids swim in, and without anyone forcing them to do anything. They can do things that benefit society and benefit themselves. We can go in and clean up abandoned coal mines because we do it through a conservation district. That's one of the challenges with McGirt. Now that's going to be delivered through the Office of Surface Mining as part of the Department of Interior. So the Department of Interior, Washington, D.C., Big Brother is going to have to go onto a private landowner in eastern Oklahoma and say, you've got an abandoned coal mine over there with these big mounds of waste with all this old equipment and this water that's sitting there that ran off and out of that old abandoned coal mine. We want to go in there and clean that up for you. Well, those landowners, one, they're going to go, what if you find something that some problem there, now you're going to punish me for having it there? Because the Conservation District and the Commission were doing that, they trusted us. They knew that if we come in there, we're going to make it right, we're going to fix it, we're going to take care of you, because our handshake, our respect, our reputation is on the line. And those local landowners, that are people that are Conservation District directors, are going to make that happen, are going to require the state and any federal entity that's there to do what they said they were going to do. But I don't know when that's a federal program that's delivered remotely, from a federal organization. I don't know how much access they're going to have to that private land. It may work fantastic, but why have a system that's worked for decades, for almost for a full century now? Why break that system apart and put in a new system for delivering the same thing?
So Trey, you might explain McGirt, that was a Supreme Court ruling, and how
Right.
that did impact
Sure.
the AML program, and how it may impact maybe some other resource programs depending on what happens.
Right. So, the McGirt ruling, which was a criminal case ruling, and so which said that the traditional native reservations of the tribes, the Indian nations in Oklahoma, were never truly dissolved, so that those Indian lands, as they're described, are still considered reservation lands for criminal cases. So that had to do with people that were being processed through the criminal courts. Well, through that, the someone at the Department of Interior, one of their attorneys, solicitors, said, oh, well, we're going to interpret that to mean that the Abandoned Mine Lands program, which is funded through a small fee or a tax on the coal industry to go in and clean up coal mines that have been abandoned by companies prior to 1977, because those companies don't exist anymore and they're on private people's lands, and it needs to be cleaned up. So the coal industry takes responsibility, and it just happens to be administered through the Department of Interior. They said, well, since those are tribal lands, then we're the only ones that can do that. So the state doesn't have the authority to do that anymore. So we're going to take that program away from the state, and we're going to administer it as the federal government ourselves. And it took their interpretation of a court ruling here, which has been supported. The Supreme Court is standing behind McGirt now, but they interpreted and took it all the way over to a natural resource program. Now, that could be, and many people will say it's pretty restricted within the Abandoned Mine Lands program because of the language in that program. But there's a possibility that could carry over into other federal conservation programs, whether it's USDA, Forestry, EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers. It opens up a very big can of worms. And our point was that we're doing our work on tribal lands that are owned by tribal members. We're doing it on land that's owned by the tribe. We actually do some work there. And we also do it on private individuals who own land who may not be tribal members, who live within the tribal nation. So we're providing that service, and there's no reason we can't simply be the intermediary or contractor to do that. There are a lot of federal programs that are delivered through state agencies or through other nonprofit agencies, through private entities that deliver programs, and there's no reason we can't do that as a state agency. But they did not provide that option or that negotiation. They just said, it's over and you're gone.
This is a program that was started in 1981. The Commission's been doing this program for over 40 years.
Right. And so, and it's also, it really is a huge negative impact to the state of Oklahoma, because with the infrastructure bill that was just passed, the federal government to stimulate the economy, or and put people who are actually doubled the amount of money available to states. So there's actually, we did have $3 million for these projects every year that Oklahoma did. Now there's $6 million available, but there's no one to deliver the program in Oklahoma because they tell us that we can't do it. So they don't have anybody hired to do it as on the federal side. So Oklahoma as a state is in a unique position. We're the only state that they're having this. They didn't take this action in any other state except Oklahoma because of the McGirt ruling. So we are in court now. So we've been to federal court, and now that we're waiting to hear the final ruling from the federal judge, and it may go forward. So what the legislature, we went back to the legislature this year and said, we think that we ought to keep this program going, because if we drop the program and are not doing or aren't available, we would have to let our employees go and get rid of all our assets. If the court rules in our favor, there's no reason that we may not be able to start back up, because we would have to get recertified as a program. We would have to start from ground zero, hire people and try and do that. And the tribes could do that just as easily, or some other entity could do that just as easily. So we want to stay and show the federal government that we're in this for the long run. So the state actually provides state funding this year for us to continue our program. So we have projects underway now, whereas the state, there's no reason the federal government's the only one that can do this or fund this, because it's on private land. We're just going out and rehabilitating natural resources, that water sources or land that needs to be returned to its native state, and just happens to be on abandoned coal mines. So we're going to continue the work, continue with our people, and hope that the legal system works it out. I mean, sometime they're going to have to take a solution, because this could get over into taxes and roads and all sorts of things. So there will have to be a congressional solution, through statute in Washington, or some type of Supreme Court ruling, or it's just going to continue. And it doesn't seem like there are any negotiations going on at this time.
So it might require you making a trip to DC and talking to a committee.
Well, yeah, we, before COVID, we went just about every year. I met with our congressional delegation, and we've met with them here locally. It is such a difficult issue, especially in Oklahoma, that, and there's not an appetite, especially nationally, because it's an Oklahoma issue right now. There's not an appetite nationally within Congress to write legislation that restricts the sovereignty, or could be interpreted as restricting the sovereignty of a tribal nation. And I don't think that anybody, I certainly don't. My kids are both Native, and I don't want to restrict the rights of the sovereign nation. We just want to provide a service within that framework and work within whatever the interpretation of the reservation is. There's still no reason. If someone's not providing services in that reservation, we can see other reservations that have always been reservations that just don't get the services, and they're not getting, whether it's in Arizona or New Mexico or wherever. There's a lot of reservation land that aren't getting the services that they ought to get. Now, whether whose fault that is, I'm not saying, but we know that it doesn't happen, and we know we can provide a service the most efficiently and the most effective through the program we have. So we'd like to be able to continue.
And you already have relationships with tribes.
Yeah, and we had 2 contracts that we'd bid the contracts, we'd awarded the contracts, we were going to sign the contract, and the federal government pulled the money. So the landowner didn't get the benefit, the Oklahoma business that was the construction didn't get the benefit, and the people of the state of Oklahoma didn't get the benefit from the natural resources being preserved. So the money just it's still out there, but it's not available to anybody to expand. So we're going to go back and pick those contracts up and fulfill those contracts. And we appreciate the state money. Mm-hmm. And we appreciate the legislature standing with us on that. Wow. So, I mean, and we built some new and strong relationships with our federal representatives, with congressional staff, because we've gotten in these issues, whether it's on this or on our flood control program or other issues. And so they have a good understanding of what it is we do and why it's important. We have really strong state and federal support for all our programs here in Oklahoma.
Congressman Lucas can go to bat one more time.
Yeah. And we look at that, and one of our most successful programs is our water quality program. That's an EPA program where we, our agency, long before I was here, took on that role and responsibility and designed it from the ground up. And part of that was going to be based on sampling the water in streams, in wadable streams in Oklahoma, all across the state on a rotating basis, and keep very strong scientific data on those. And so there are over 700 streams and water bodies in Oklahoma that are considered impaired or polluted. And so currently. And they may be from runoff from agriculture land, from a point source, from a lot of different things, turbidity, dirt or silt in the water. A lot of things that they can be on that list for. But we have been able to create this for the last few decades, this database, and then we put conservation practices through EPA programs, but also through USDA and state programs along those streams, whether it's no-till or planting riparian areas or fencing the cattle out of the stream or providing alternative water sources, all these different things that we do anyway, but we target those, and we've been able to take almost 100 of those streams off and create success stories. So, and Oklahoma leads the nation in that and has for the entire history of the program. So, and we lead the nation in removing phosphorus from streams. And 26% of all the phosphorus that's removed from all the streams in the entire country is removed in Oklahoma. And we're number 3 in nitrates removal from water. And all that's based on because we're delivering an EPA program voluntarily in conjunction with USDA programs and state programs through conservation districts. So we have access, we have the ability to talk to landowners and have them implement these practices and accept them simply because it's the delivery tool and the respect and that people have built and the standards people have set and the trust they've set over the last 8 decades. And we see that really as a blueprint for other regulatory programs. I mean, there's regulation. We need laws. We need speed limits. We need laws on protecting our pharmaceuticals. There are lots of food, all those things. But there are some things that we can get people to do because it's the right thing, because they want to do it for themselves, and there's a benefit to society. And it's just engaging them, providing some incentive for them. It's not free. It costs to do these things, but if you go in and incentivize them, but also do it on a cost share basis where, if you'll put some money up, the state or the federal people will put money up, or the community, basically that's what it is, the society will put some money up because it's going to benefit the society. What benefits the landowner will benefit society too.
Goes around.
Yeah.
It's the ecosystem in a
Sure.
sense too that
Sure.
way.
And we're doing the same thing. We have another new pilot project. It seems like I think we take on too many projects. One of them is feral hogs, which is considered an invasive species, and we hear about it. Hunting of feral hogs has expanded their reign, and people have transported them from the south and moved them into far reaches as far as the Panhandle, and then they're very prolific. They reproduce several litters of hogs a year, multiple. They're very intelligent, resourceful animals. So the federal government through USDA provided a pilot to 10 southern states. So the Oklahoma Conservation Commission is working in 6 counties along the Red River, and then 4 counties in northern Oklahoma around Kaw Lake in that area. And we're putting resources, electronic traps that have cameras and could be remotely activated. We have a couple of employees that go out to landowners, assess the damage, and then provide the traps. And then we work with APHIS, which is the federal trappers, who are state ag department folks, and then they make the decision on catching them. Because one of the things about hogs is you can go in and catch one or two, and the others will be educated and they won't go back in the trap. Or you can wait and bait and get them comfortable, and the entire sounder will go in there, and you might catch 40 hogs at one time. And once you educate them, they'll move off. I farmed myself, and we raised corn along the river there, and mostly the hogs live in the woods along the rivers and creeks. Well, you wouldn't see them. We didn't have a hog problem. And then you would go out in the spring and plant your corn. And as soon as that corn started to come out of the ground, suddenly the hogs appeared because they knew it was there, and they would go along and root up every individual corn plant and just go down the road, popping the corn plants out of the ground and nipping them off. And you would go out there and think I thought first it was a mechanical disturbance, like we weren't cultivating our corn, but it looked like in the old days when I was the guy that drove the plow with the cultivator in between the rows that I'd drifted off and dozed off or gotten distracted and plowed up the corn. My dad used to yell at me about that, but these hogs did the same thing, just right down the road. And we had an insurance claim where they said 50% of the corn was lost, but it wasn't lost like this half of the field. It was a row here halfway down, and then 2 rows would be good, and then they would move over here and take a row all the way down, and 3 rows over here. It was just scattered around all over the field. But they've done that. They can destroy. They're really bad on Bermuda grass because they like to root up the roots. They'll get in parks and lawns and golf courses. They'll get in water supplies. They carry a lot of diseases that not only affect other swine and domestic hogs, but also can be transferred to cattle and people as well. So we're developed that program and delivering that right now. We also, through our funding in the state cost share program, individual conservation districts can buy their own hog traps and have those available to loan out to local landowners. So I think we have about 10 districts now that have electronic traps that they're providing to landowners. So, and we consider that an invasive species, the same as we might mesquite or eastern red cedar that come in, or weeds or other things that cause a natural resource concern. It affects soil, water, and human health too.
They're nowhere near the endangered species list then.
You're right. Yeah. No. And I think one thing that our idea is that we'll go in and provide these traps, like we're doing 10 per county in this pilot project. And if we can somewhat get those hogs under control, not eliminate them, but at least reduce the damage to where, and the federal program is 80, they want to reduce the damage by 80%. But then we can just leave those traps there. And whether the Conservation District or the Cattlemen's Association or Farm Bureau or an organization of landowners comes together and wants to take over the operation of those, and manage that, we're not sure who is going to do that. We'd like for it to be the local people saying, okay, now we're going to maintain what we're doing. We're going to continue to trap and keep them out. We may not be 100% control, but kind of like the boll weevil eradication program that they did, is if we all come together as landowners and managers and take care of this, we can keep it down. We won't stop all the flooding, we won't stop all the hogs, we probably won't stop all the plant disease, but we can control it if they all work together. And they manage it locally. That's key to it.
So it's like 3 sides of a triangle. You've got to have everybody working
Sure.
the thing.
Sure.
Anything else on your list? Your list.
My list.
Well, I would like you to talk about the accomplishment of the current budget, Trey, because the appropriations this year is a record for conservation. I think that's speaks to your leadership and working with OECD, and it's just having been where I sat for many years, it's a real commitment from the legislature for conservation.
Well, I mean, I think it's something that we're really proud of. I think it's part of it is just the ability to tell the story,
Yeah.
and to have people that are willing to listen. And there was a time period when I first took the job that there was a crop or a political feeling within the legislature that smaller government was better no matter what. And that didn't mean if you were out there saving lives or doing whatever smaller was better. Less paid highway patrolmen, fewer highway patrolmen, whatever it was, less money spent on roads. All of it was better because it was smaller. That was the philosophy, and you dealt with that, and you tried to explain why your program was as important as all the other programs, and why not funding it at all. But I think that the people have seen that sometimes neglecting things, such as neglecting a dam or neglecting a road, can come back, or neglecting public safety can really come back and hurt you more. And sometimes you have to take care of that vehicle. You have to change the oil in it. You have to put new tires on it, or you're going to have a major problem, either financially or safety-wise. And that's what we stressed through that entire time period. And the legislature has really responded to that. And also, we've tried to give the message that we're problem solvers. Whatever the problem is, we're not going to ever say, well, that's not our deal, we don't do that. If there's a way that we can solve a problem with the organization we have, both within the state and our conservation districts, we're going to do that. An example is there was a log jam in Logan County that backed the water up onto a road in Oklahoma County, and it was washing the bridge out. It was also washing the landowners' land out because the creek was finding a way to go, but it was backing the water up across the road and stopping up some of the major traffic area up there by Edmond and between Edmond and Guthrie. So we said, well, that's not something that is part of any of our programs, but we're willing through the conservation district to tackle that. And through a federal program, the Emergency Watershed Program, we do very similar projects. So this was just simply the state said, okay, we'll set aside some funding. So we said we'll be the one to coordinate through our conservation district. They can handle the contracting and get a local contractor, and he went out there and cleaned it out. The problem was solved. The landowners have a better property, and the road's protected now. The water doesn't back up. The flooding's been reduced. But being willing to be a problem solver has really kind of carried our message over there. And so this year the legislature, all the requests that we had piled up over the years, and the importance of our local conservation district employees, the importance of our geographic information service that we're providing, and the coordination for the state, our dams that they knew we were taking a small amount of dollars, we were putting $500,000 into it, and in some years getting a $200 million return on that in protection for the state of Oklahoma in damage that didn't occur to a flood during a flood year. And we were able to tell that story, that we can take a small amount of money and invest it. So this year they took our state budget from $13 million up to $20 million, which is a significant increase. And that means that we're going to have to show results for that. Yeah. We've told them for years what we could do. Now we have to do it. Part of that is some funding for our abandoned minelands program to continue that as a state program. But one thing we want to show the state is, even if it's funded by the state, it's a value. It's a value to the people of Oklahoma. It's a value for public safety, because these abandoned mine sites are drowning hazards. They're public safety hazard next to roads and bridges and things. So there is a value to that. So even if it just does have to be a continually funded state project, it's worth the funding. We hope. We don't have to do that. We hope we can have access to those. And it's not even federal funded, it's coal industry funds. But we're going to continue on. And they've really been responsive now. And we know that Oklahoma's economy is going to cycle again. We see that the oil prices are high, but oil prices will go back down. We'll go to, ag prices will go down, land values will go down, state income will go down, and we'll be back. But we need to get the most for what they've given us now, so that we can show that return, going forward. A couple of things that have allowed us to do that is some long-term investment. They've set aside bonding money, because we rehabilitate flood control dams, which means we do major construction projects that can cost $10 million to raise the height of a dam, put a new pipe in it, and improve the drainage around it. And the federal government will pay 65% of that, but the state has to provide 35%. Well, those are 10-year projects from the conception till the, when you walk away with after it's completed. Well, we might start on one of those, the idea of it when the state's economy is good. But when it comes time for the state to pay their share, we're always at the bottom of the oil boom and bust. And there's no money, no appropriations available. They would love to fund them, but they're cutting people. They can't come up with $3 or $5 million for us, so they passed a bond issue. So the $17 million is sitting there, and we're utilizing that. We just finished a big project in Elk City that protects Elk City and I-40. We're going to Wilburton to rehabilitate their dam, which provides the water source for the city of Wilburton. Meeker or Perry are both the same way. Those are the next ones that move on. But that allows us to plan out in the future, kind of like the 8-year plan for the DOT for our roads and bridges. This allows us to get ahead of that. And then they also, our cost share program we talk a lot about that puts conservation practices on the individual's land. That's always been a very small portion of the gross production tax on oil. And it's been renewed for 2 years. And it's got an automatic sunset. And then they decide if they want to renew it again. This time they decided, let's renew it for 5 years. So that kind of long-range funding allows us to look at the program differently, to say, okay, this is a program that's going to continue. Conservation districts can look at, okay, we want to tackle these projects or these natural resource concerns over 5 years versus let's get this money out because it may not be there the next year. So I think that longer vision, that investment is something that the legislature's really responded to. And I think it's a good use of taxpayers' money.
Is it hard to keep up with those deadlines, like 2 years and 5 years? Who's keeping up with when, it's time to go after this now?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a challenge. Sometimes we worked on it this year, but it renews it for 2 years, so it's actually in the third year. So you got to be sure which year you're in if it needs to be renewed.
And is that your role or your assistant's role?
Those are my role, really. Those bigger issues, especially the legislative issues. Each they talk about lobbying or legislative relations, but each agency is required by the state to have a liaison. So I fill that role as this agency's liaison. So I'm the person from the agency that goes and talks to the legislators. We don't do lobbying in the sense of going in and being over there every time they come off the floor and shaking their hands. We go over and talk to them about specific issues and specific programs when needed, when we're asked to, and then when we think we can provide them some information. But and then we just try to build the personal relationships so that they know who we are, they know who their local conservation district people are, and they know that we're here to be of an asset to them. And it seems to be a formula that at least this group of legislators is responsive to.
I was reading somewhere the acronym APCIE, Oklahoma Pandemic Center for Innovation and Excellence.
That's another one where we saw it as an opportunity. They moved the state testing lab for human health and animal health and combined them in Stillwater to build this pandemic relief, and they're using some of the pandemic money, ARPA, I believe it's ARPA money or some of the other money. There's so many pots of money to build this. But what really the way that they're looking at that, and we saw our role in it, is One Health. So plant health and animal health and human health are all tied together. And that's really a part of this regenerative agriculture movement that is an outgrowth from soil health, is that we found that if you grow a healthier plant, then the food that you get out of it is healthier, and it will make for a healthier animal, which will make for a healthier meat. And we really begin to measure. One of the things they're doing is looking at BRICS test, which looks at the sugars in grass. We can look at the sugars in grain. We can also look at the sugars in fruit and vegetables in the market. And they found that locally produced, regeneratively produced lettuce, carrots, everything through their even meats, all have more vitamins, more minerals, higher sugar content than those that are produced in large scale commercial production, thousands of miles away. So that's part of what this pandemic research lab will show is they want to actually have testing and research that shows the way you produce the grain or the way you produce the cattle is going to reduce in more healthier human beings. We've got a program that we're working with a nonprofit in Tulsa called Fresh RX, which there's a clinic there with a doctor who says that people that suffer from diabetes should get more fresh fruits and vegetables. So they source fresh fruits and vegetables, and the foundations and charities there in Tulsa have said, yeah, we'll fund that. So they go out, and these farmers that are producing these in regenerative practices, it's not organic, but it's natural locally. They bring the vegetables, and they get paid by the nonprofit, and they're working with our soil health folks and to learn how to do that. And they've seen A1 levels drop significantly in their patients, but they're following it through, and OSU is going to be involved, and through extension, in teaching them also how to cook with these. If it's butternut squash or something kale or something that they're not used to seeing when they go to the grocery store, what's the best way to do this? What are alternatives to the processed food or other things that you're able to buy?
Very cool.
It comes back to that 6-inch dirt and our soil.
Soil.
Yeah, the whole life
Soil.
comes out of that. Yes,
And
that's
rain.
exactly true. Yeah.
I think you're ready for the last question.
Well, no, not quite. We've got to talk about this.
Oh.
this
Oh, my chain?
Your chain.
This is my chain. This is my COVID chain. During the pandemic, there were times when we couldn't be in the office at all. But if we wanted to be in the office, then they had a temperature monitor downstairs where you had to go and put your face down, and it read you. And so if you for that day, then you got a wristband that you could come in and be in the office. So anyone that came in the building, and we were on quite a bit of telework. Some people were completely teleworking. We had a skeleton staff that came in the office every day. So every day I would save my wristband and made a chain. Now this, I must admit, this isn't the entire chain for the entire pandemic because it would probably go around the room. But I did make a Christmas tree chain to decorate my office with.
Did the different colors be significant?
Just different days. So you couldn't wear one all week. You had to get checked. And the idea, especially at that time, was they really wanted to stop people, before vaccinations.
Yeah.
They wanted, you might not even feel ill, but your fever might be up. So,
Did someone actually police it during?
yes, because as you saw, as you came in the building there, you couldn't get up. So we have a card that lets us in the building. So we could get to that front door, but there was a security guard there. And so when it read and said your temperature was within range, then they would give you, and then they would push the button and let you in.
Wow.
So yeah, it changed the way we did business.
Mm-hmm.
And now, we talk about the future and what's going to happen next. We've accepted, even the old guys like me have accepted the telework model. And it's a strain. It's a different way of doing business. Some jobs are very suited to be done remotely. We've always had people that worked all over the state because we had conservation districts and programs. All of them always had an office. So we have different people here on different days. We do more scheduling. We do more Zoom and Teams meetings. I believe that there's a real value in that one-on-one connection. I still believe it's hard to build a true team in what we do and deliver the services that we do without some personal interaction.
Yeah.
So we'll continue to do that, but we're going to deliver that, in a different way and allow our employees that flexibility. One thing that we've done is we'll see how it works out. Might come back and see whether I'm here next year or not, but we put together a group of our entry and kind of mid-level management people who are looking at the organization and all our programs and the structure and how we deliver what we do, to see if this is the best way. Is having a water quality division, a conservation program division, a field services, abandoned mines, is that the best way to do it? Or, is this the best way to utilize the people and perform our functions? So they may come up with a different way of operating, but we're trying to engage the staff and have them buy in to what it is. And probably talk about when I first came here, probably the biggest mistakes I made were when I saw problems or issues and made decisions. The best way to solve this is to do X. Well, on the farm, that's all I had to go on. Now I might, from my knowledge that I had before, I might call somebody and ask them, but the decision was mine. I just went ahead and made it. But here, it affects a lot of different people, especially when those people have a lot more knowledge than you do. You need to go out and gather that knowledge from those other people and expertise, and then make a decision. And so we've done during the pandemic and over the last few years, we've done a lot more work groups. We've redone an employee handbook. We've developed a telework policy. We've developed a purchasing policy. But instead of that just be someone sit down and write that out, we put together a group of people that work on a small project for a short amount of time with an end product, and then they go back to their normal duties, and then we spread that across. So that may be the way that we deliver services in the future.
Get more buy-in that way.
Yeah. And I think it does get more buy-in. So we'll see. But I'm committed to it, and none of our division directors, our leadership, are on that working group. So it's just going to be some of the people. We try to get different generations, because you have people that are baby boomers that aren't necessarily division directors, but they just been with the agency a long time. So we'll see how it turns out. It's better. It's kind of the idea of the strategic planning, but anytime you say strategic planning, it just makes people back up and run away, because it's such a structured, and it's not so much about what the mission and the vision are, as what are we delivering and what's the best way to do business.
Yeah, and sometimes they give you their input, but don't see any action
Yes.
from it. So it's kind of
Yeah. So hopefully we'll come up with something positive.
Do you anticipate being here 5-10 years?
I am honestly not tired of it at all. And since it was a mid-career change for me, I don't have an end date really for myself. I would stay probably as long as they would have me. But, you never know. One thing I'll say that I think is there are certain ways that we do things here and ways that we're structured that I think are more effective. And we've talked about that through our delivery system. But one thing is that our commission is an independent commission. And that may not be the most popular mode of organization now, but our commissioners, my bosses, they have to be conservation district directors, and they represent geographic areas, 5 areas of the state, and the governor appoints them and the Senate confirms them. But I answer to them, and really only to them, and they're responsible for the financial and everything else of this agency. And that independence, one, allows us to operate with other partners and with our customers without a lot of political influence, or without a lot of sudden changes. As we've had leadership, in nearly 2-decade increments along, and it's not always good. If you get bad leadership, you need to make a change. But those people the commissioners are able to be nimble and act quickly if there's a change needs to be made, but they're also able to take a longer vision. Just the election cycle doesn't necessarily change the protection of natural resources in Oklahoma, and I think that's a real value. And I hope that independence can stay in place.
Yeah.
Well, check your list and see if you've covered everything you want to cover. We have on mine.
I think so. And I think one thing that Ben and I talked about, is what, when it's all over, how do you want to be remembered, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's usually my last question.
Oh, your last question? Okay. Well, you said you'd covered all yours, but
I always say that one to last. So go ahead.
Okay. Well,
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, I thought about that, but I think we start out from kind of the physicians, the Hippocratic Oath, which is kind of do no harm. And so whether we're talking about to the land or the water or to this organization, we don't want to do any harm to it. I don't want to deplete my soil. I don't want to pollute the water. And this organization, I don't want to come in and dismantle it or make it less effective than it was. And it's only by understanding the resource you have to work with, whether it's natural resources or a state agency or a delivery system, and respecting what it is and what's been done before, then you want to kind of build on that. And the next one is the basic stewardship, which is leave it better than you found it. Now, if you come in with the idea, well, I can do better, I'm better than they were before, then that's kind of an arrogance. But if you come in with the idea, well, I'm not going to do any harm, but then I'm going to try to make it better. So I'm going to try to improve the quality of my soil. I'm going to try to improve the water for the people of Oklahoma, and I'm going to try to improve the agency. And if I can do that, then that would be the best way to be remembered, is that we left it better than we found it. And I don't think that means that it was bad to start with. It's just mean that we worked hard to try to make things better. And if you're not doing that, then you're either spinning your wheels or you're going backwards.
Don't want to be stagnant.
Yeah.
Are we good, Bia?
Very good.
All right.
Trey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you including me in it.